Hey, it's KP coming to you live from Corona, California. Well, we've got another interesting week, tons of unrest in the world, so we'll talk about housing seasonality is impacted by geopolitical events, and then we'll get into ETFs, exchange traded funds, what that can mean for you and your investing. And then at the very end, I'll give you a hot sleep tip. We'll talk about the science of sleep. Let's get cracking here. So we had a Fed meeting a couple weeks ago, and there's kind of a regular cadence to the Fed. And trust me, right now the Fed is fully in control of what's going on for the economy, for stock markets, certainly for interest rates. I've gathered a lot of information from a bunch of different places. It's been a week since we filmed. I'll try and filter it out and break it down for you and put it in a way that we can all digest it together. So when the Fed comes out and has their open market committee meeting, there's a regular cadence, and you can go online and you can see when those meetings are and when they're going to be talking. And remember, they have a dual mandate. They want maximum employment for the economy, and they want to fight inflation. They want price stability. Inflation is all the talk and all the rage at the Fed. They have their meeting. They made their 75 basis point rate hike. The following week, all the Fed speakers, so it's important to listen to their rhetoric and what they say, because you get a little glimpse on what they're going to be thinking as they are voting members going forward. The following week is the release of the Fed Open Market Committee meeting minutes. So that's the actual transcript of what goes on. You and I don't see the whole meeting, it's behind closed doors, but the transcript comes out. The word inflation came up 95 times. So it's clear they're trying to battle inflation. And I think I've shown you one of the pieces I get information from online. There's a tool called the CME tool, basically a Fed Watch tool. It's a Fed funds future bet on where the Fed will likely be raising or not raising. So it's a website that any of you can go to. This is the probability of the next meeting of whether they're going to hike 50 basis points or 75 basis points. So right now, about 2/3 chance, it says about 67.5% chance that there'll be a 50 basis point rate hike in the December 14th meeting. Now, that number was about 82% before the Fed started speaking, and one of the speakers speaking was Fed President James Bullard. So they call him Raging Bull Bullard. He's one of the hawks. And he came out, when he spoke, he said, we think the terminal rate, the target rate, the end rate of where all this rate hikes will go should be between 5 and 7%. So at 5 and 7%, that's extremely high, much higher than where we are today. So the market reacted. The market basically said, okay, maybe they might do a 75 basis point rate hike at this next one. Maybe they'll end up in the 5% range when this is all said and done, not stay down to this 4.5% range. So Fed rhetoric, once again, is impacting markets. It hurt the stock market. Your investment, my investment, our 401ks if we're in the stock markets. So Fed rhetoric matters. And this tool can help you get a gauge in live real time what different events around the world, news, data, speaking from the Fed rhetoric, how it impacts where we think Fed rate hikes will go. So the first Friday of every month, this Friday coming up, the first Friday of December, the Bureau of Labor Statistics will put out, they call it the November jobs report, which is really the second half of data collected from October and the first half of November. It's hard to get live real-time data. One of the things they do is they call thousands of people on the phone, literally, and record their answers. And that is one of the components in these kinds of surveys and this data that comes out. There's a nice cadence and some structure and order to the way data comes out. So we want to talk about housing seasonality. That's all macro stuff, and that's great. But I'm part owner and a lender, and we got boots on the ground, and we're serving communities, and we're trying to help you get a house. It's the number one way to attain wealth, to change multi-generational wealth for you and your family. This is the time of year, traditionally, when people who sell a house will start to say, you know what, I'm in the house, it's the holidays, maybe now is not the time to sell. We'll think about my strategy for selling next year. So in a normal market, not a refi boom like we had in 2020 and 2021 with the most historically low interest rates ever, people tend to just kind of chill between Thanksgiving and the New Year. 75% roughly of all people that sell their home then buy another one. So you're taking listings off the market, sellers, and you're taking those potential buyers off the market. So it kind of slows down this time of the year. That's just normal seasonal trends. Then as people come out from their New Year's Eve shenanigans, they come out the next couple days, they start looking at houses, they start going online, they start getting serious about making an offer. But generally the spring is a great purchase season. So purchase money really starts to pick up the beginning of the year. You start to see it as a contract for a new home, which then becomes a loan, which then makes its way to the lender's underwriting team, and then it gets closed and funded, really starts picking up in March. So fundings in a housing industry really pick up between March through July. That is a seasonal trend. So a strategy that you could employ is maybe get out in front of that seasonal trend. There'll be a lot more people looking. Maybe if you look before they look, you might find a house for a better price, and you might find yourself getting into the home that you want with less competition to get there. Because there's still a ton of borrowers out looking. There's a ton of demand. We just had a record Black Friday, and we'll probably have a record Cyber Monday. The consumer is strong, certainly the consumer that is in the position to buy a home. One of the things that drives me and why I want to teach financial literacy, I see this dichotomy in our society. You look at Europe, right? You have the haves and the have-nots. Now, America's not there yet. There's not a huge gap between, for that middle class. There's still tons of wealth available for you to go get, but it really starts with buying a home and not renting. Having said that, we saw what happened with all these changes in home price appreciation the last couple of years. Imagine if you listened to any of the negative media that constantly says how bad it is to buy a home, and you gave up 60% in home price appreciation, 40%, 20% year over year. Think about what that wealth could do for you and your family. And why did you not buy a home if you're renting? Because you saw something on a news network or some influencer? I'm in it every day. This is what me and my team do every day. It's always a good time to buy a house as opposed to renting. Always. Because you always need a roof over your head, and that is how you gain wealth. I'm not being self-serving. I'm telling you what I've seen being in this industry for 22 plus years. So hopefully the seasonal trend that's coming up in the spring is a warning to you to jump out in front of that and possibly get a better deal. Rates could come down. You can always refinance later to take advantage of lower rates. If you wait for rates to come down and for the spring season and seasonality to kick in, you'll be in with the herd. Sometimes getting ahead of everyone else is a smart thing to do. And oh, by the way, tomorrow, you're gonna see the last of 12 readings for home price appreciation year over year. Okay, so let's talk about geopolitical events. There's a lot going on in the news lately, whether it's the Chinese unrest because of their zero COVID policy, or whether it's the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Whatever it is, it does impact the economy. It even impacts housing to some degree. It certainly impacts the stock market and investing. So let's take something really volatile like oil, right? Russia invades Ukraine. Everyone freaks out that oil and gas is going to be more expensive because there are pipelines that are at risk, pipelines being shut down. Europe is instituting a cap here in the first week of December on the price that they will allow European nations to buy Russian oil, right? $65 a barrel, for example. So that could impact things. If there were an event in the Middle East, a war or something like that, OPEC, which is a huge producer of oil, that would impact the supply and demand and the price of oil. Fortunately, right now, the World Cup's going on. So go USA, they're playing Iran this week and hopefully they win. The Middle East is certainly on a high right now because of the World Cup in Qatar, spelled Qatar. For those of us from Texas, misannounce things. But you know what? There are other things like China and their unrest. If they have a zero COVID lockdown policy, that means there's less demand for oil. Potentially 1 million barrels a day not being consumed by the Chinese people. There's civil unrest right now. People are watching attendees at the World Cup in Qatar with no masks on in these stadiums with record attendance, like 88,000 people, that were attending these games, right? Spain played Germany in an epic match. And all these people are sitting next to each other not wearing masks. So if you're in China watching these games on TV and you're like, why am I having to deal with this? Why is the rest of the world dealing with this? My freedoms are being taken away. It's very interesting. I moved out here almost 7 years ago, moved my family out here to Orange County, California. And there's a huge Asian influence here. I got a speeding ticket, which I get about one a year. I apologize. I think I'm a good driver. That's why I go fast. But when I look at the ticket, it's written in Mandarin Chinese, it's written in Korean, Japanese, Spanish. There's all these different languages that is written in because there's such a heavy influence. If there's a lockdown policy going on in one of the largest countries in the world, well, maybe Chinese money won't be flowing into the West Coast to be buying investment properties or second homes. So there's less demand. That is something to think about when it comes to buying. So it is always interesting to look at what goes on around the world. Because of all these geopolitical events, I will say there's a really grand trend going on of nationalization. A lot of countries are saying, if you're Germany and 80% of your oil and natural gas come from other countries and they decide to shut you off, maybe you should think about finding oil and natural gas from other places. Here in America, we don't like our people to be impacted by the price of food because of other things going on in the Middle East or in Asia. And so there's this big trend now for nations to be more self-sufficient. I'm betting on America. We've got great neighbors in Canada and Mexico. We've got pretty much all the natural resources we really need. That's not to say that we aren't beholden to some. Certainly, there are some rare earth minerals that are, made in batteries, such as, lithium and selenium and all these things that are controlled by other countries around the world. We have to take time to be able to build our own self-reliance on these things. And certainly in the short term, the cost of batteries, electric vehicles, energy could go up or down based on these trends. But there's certainly a trend now for countries around the world to try and go, maybe we should align ourselves with people in other nations that we trade with that aren't going to hold our own people hostage when it comes to prices. Inflation is an invisible tax and hurts everyone. So geopolitical events absolutely impact the way you invest, no matter what asset class we're talking about. On that note, exchange traded funds, ETFs, it's kind of a basket of stocks or a portfolio of stocks that is basically created by private companies in the private sector. Maybe you're not a stock picker. Maybe you don't know where to begin. Maybe you don't want to take a lot of risk. If you pick one stock and you're not very diversified and it does poorly, then you may look and go, hey, I'm not doing a good job, I'm losing money. Remember, you don't really realize a loss or gain until you sell something. An ETF is an alternative way to invest in a group of stocks. And there are so many ETFs out there. Most of us who use financial advisors, they will suggest certain ETFs for you to invest in. Let's say you want to be in large cap tech, okay? You don't want to buy just Apple and Google and Microsoft. You want to buy a basket of stocks. So there's an ETF for that, right? And there are many, by the way. So there are some advantages to allowing these ETFs to pick for you, kind of be diversified. So, they're not as volatile. Let's just say that, for example. Now, if the broader market is changing and shifting, then even ETFs can be impacted as well. It's just a strategy that people employ when they don't want to pick stocks. And that's not to say you have to do one or the other. Some strategies may be to pick some individual stocks and pick some ETFs so you can kind of balance out your portfolio. Again, it's different for everybody, your risk appetite, how long you want to keep money tied up and invested. A 3 to 5 year horizon for your investments is pretty solid. That way you can kind of get an idea for what's going on. Maybe you think Europe has been beaten down because they've been in recession and now's the time to invest in Europe, but you don't know what companies are in Europe to invest in. There are European Eurozone ETFs, right? So, the percentages of which you invest in these, how long you want to keep in these investments, and which ones you want to pick, that's all up for discussion. I'm not trying to advocate. I just want to talk about ETFs in case you haven't heard of them. Now, some people, there's some cons to it, right? Someone else is in control, some other company, so there's a fee potentially. And again, I would advise you to ask a financial advisor. For those listening on your home TV, there's some great financial advisors putting out some solid content. So maybe you can reach out to one of them. So ETFs, just a nice, unique way to invest in the stock market. There's some tax advantages to it as well. So again, I advise you to get with a financial advisor. All right, I promised you sleep tips. I'm gonna tell you how I monitor my sleep. In the holidays, we're talking about making our changes for the new year. We probably just ate a lot. We might've slept a lot on the couch. Did you get restful sleep? Do you know the science of sleep? Do you know how to track your sleep? Do you know what impacts sleep? Rest is a really solid component of how your mind works and how you can think clearly about money, about investing, about housing, about everything. Now, I'm a little unique. I don't use an alarm. I don't use an alarm clock. I just allow my body to wake up. Now, we have 4 kids, so a lot of times my kids wake me up. Last night was 3 in the morning by the 3.5-year-old. It's always a fun night, and so it's hard to get yourself back to sleep. Your body has what's called REM cycles, right? So this rapid eye movement, REM, and there is a science to that. And each REM cycle is about 90 minutes long. So I always find that I track my sleep using my Whoop band, and it monitors my sleep based on my heart rate. So you can find different ways to monitor your sleep data and see how you're doing. I always tend to find that I wake up in increments of 90 minutes. So I usually sleep about 4.5 or 6 hours during the week. I know people that can't function on less than 7.5 hours of sleep, and I get that. The more REM cycles you have back to back, the more restorative the sleep is for your brain. And there are different parts of REM sleep. Deep sleep, called SWS. There's REM sleep, which is not as deep as your SWS. Then there's your light sleep, and then there's your awake sleep. Your brain does not get fully deep restorative sleep if you've had alcohol or caffeine. Now, I gave a caffeine tip a few episodes back. Go take a look at that. It's at the end. All of these episodes are earmarked, and you can sift through them pretty quickly. Caffeine has a half-life of about 180 minutes in your body, so about 3 hours. I try not to drink after 6 p.m. at all, unless in Vegas, but it takes about 3 hours for half of it to go away. That means half is still left. And when you have caffeine in your system, it does keep you from having the deeper sleep. Alcohol, I hear people say all the time, oh, when I have a cocktail or a drink, I fall asleep really quick. Well, that's great that you fell asleep and you passed out, but did you get restorative sleep? Did your brain really restore itself? And the answer is no. And I have the data to show it. I know on nights where I have a cocktail or a drink or two or more, I can see that I get less restorative sleep. So alcohol and caffeine influence the quality of your sleep. That's something to think about. And then of course, people talk about power naps. That first 10 to 20 minutes, okay, is not too deep a sleep. It's right before you go into the deepest part of your REM cycle. That's an effective power nap. But if you sleep past that 20 minutes, your brain goes into a deeper sleep. If you're woken up before that cycle finishes, about 90 minutes, you'll actually wake up more tired. So it's either 10 or 20 or finish all the way to 90 minutes. Let's say it's Thanksgiving, your team won, Cowboys won, Longhorns won on Friday, you're having a great football weekend, and you want to take a full-blown 3-hour nap. You do you. It's Thanksgiving weekend, or we got the holidays coming up. That's 2 REM cycles, by the way. So I'll tell you, when you do wake up in the morning though, the most awake you're gonna be is right then all day. So something to think about when you're alert, when your brain is fully restored, how to restore it, and how to get financial freedom by getting restful sleep. I hope you got some value from this. Have a great week. Cheers.